Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to have a 15 minutes closing in 13 minutes, so I have to speak faster or differently. So thanks for the panels and especially for keeping the time. I will focus in my conclusion or the final discussion, because I'm not going to summarize, it's not possible, to focus on the end users. Because we know what the providers write on their websites. We can easily download the programs. But what the end users have said in the first panel this morning is not what's written on their website. But I think that's exactly what we need to implement the climate services and to grow the market for climate services. So we have quite some things to do in the Commission now. And before I conclude, I would like to go back 1 year to the first workshop we had on the climate services roadmap, or where it was decided to create this roadmap. That time we had many questions. So we left this workshop after a full day discussion, and it was just questions we had. We had no answers, just questions. And I think what this roadmap helped was to structure the questions. And I think that was a big step already. There are still many questions, and without these questions there was no need to have this roadmap. So I think it reconfirms we have to continue discussing, but we have to be selective in whom we discuss with. And what became very clear after the experts presented the roadmap was we have a completely different set of end users with different questions than we thought we would have 1 year ago. And I think this is the big lesson learned we had in all the discussions with the expert group over the last year. And sometimes we just met and we were just asking questions. So this was reconfirmed this morning that we have end users with completely different set of questions that are very relevant. And so this is why I will also focus the conclusions now on the end users. As I've said before, for the providers, we know most of the products offered. We have learned that there is a big market, there is a big demand, and Paul has clearly put some figures into this potential demand. It's now on us to identify the proper instruments to tap this market. And we have to respect the different time frames. So we cannot change the time frame that climate science is using in their modeling. But we have to respect the time frame that companies need. But we have heard this morning there's different needs from big players, intermediaries, but also the SMEs that we have to support, because as Juncker clearly says, they are the engine of our European economy. And we have a completely different set of actors suddenly in the spotlight than we thought we would have 1 year ago. So some networks are ready to show demonstration of climate services. We have seen some international players have done climate services with their companies, with external providers, and they are ready in their networks to maybe show more demonstration of climate services. But there's other players that need preparation. We need to develop some pilots maybe to create some stability in this community, because we cannot talk from SME to SME. I think what we have heard this morning is that SMEs are acting in different communities. So we have to tap these communities and not talking to player by player, because these communities might come up with a very good question, with a very clear demand that can be served by climate services. We just need to go on a small additional step to really make this climate services happen. Paul said this morning that private sector funding is missing. I agree. I would also add that private sector knowledge is missing. There is a tremendous knowledge in the private sectors that we cannot tap if we just stick to our public domains. If we come with a national adaptation plan and national climate service ideas, we have to listen to the private sector, because very often the solutions are there on the private sector. They might not call it climate services. They might call it differently. So I think we really have to change the way we act in this climate services domain on European level, but also on the national level. And this was one question that came up this morning in the first panel. What about the national initiatives? Of course, the European Union is not subsidizing the national initiatives. And we have to act where we have to act on a European level. But we are still funding the JPI Climate, which is a European member state initiative. And I assume that very often these private sector associations rather prefer talking to their national scientists than listening to what's going on in Brussels. It will be our task to structure this approach, but we cannot get active suddenly with research innovation with private companies in an area where maybe 50% don't know where Brussels lies. So this is the conclusion I draw. So we have to really look into the different networks and see how these companies can get a return of investment with the help of climate services. We heard that standards help saving money and that some multinational players have difficulties understanding the science. And I think this is a message that also the providers of climate services this afternoon got in the way of communicating climate science. For the small and medium-sized enterprises, we heard about a different challenge. It's the skills in the companies. So these companies need to change some things, but they sometimes don't have the resources to do these big changes that multinational players do have. So they will have to work on skills. And I don't know if research and innovation can help there. Maybe we need a different instrument there. And this is why it's good that we have the roadmap with different actors that can show how can we change these skills, how can we support these SMEs to really make use of the climate services. What we heard is that they need, the SMEs need another access to, or structures to access information. So they will most likely not use the big flagships we have to disseminate information. They might rather first ask around in their network. So we are back to the network again. We have to acknowledge that there's many decisions that SMEs have to take every day to survive, especially the SMEs in the startup phase. We have instruments in Horizon to support the development of SMEs, and I assume the first priority in their business plan is not climate change. This is what we simply have to acknowledge. But we have to understand how decisions are taken and to offer a climate service information layer that might not need to be implemented immediately, but maybe in the upcoming years. So, but it has to be on the agenda. Having said that, maybe climate services should not say we are here. Climate services might maybe say, how can we help you, the company or the government or the mayor, to achieve your objectives, your business objectives, your social objectives you have in a city. So maybe we could imagine start just asking the question differently. We have different questions, but we have to test them now. And we will have instruments to really test these questions to help the companies achieve their business objectives. I think this is the core action that climate services should deliver, acknowledging that there's many other different questions to be answered. There was a big science knowledge developed in the research framework 6 and 7, and the research funders were pushing into the direction of climate services because there is an immense knowledge we have. We now have to tap the knowledge. So I was a bit afraid that when we always say scientists ask the wrong question, to give the wrong impression. Of course, scientists ask questions in the way they have asked it. This is how science was supported. Now there's the need to go the different step, but this does not mean that we stop funding the science on climate change. So this will continue. That's what we heard in the last panel. But what we heard is we need a policy commitment. This is what many actors in our stakeholder consultations said. And this is much easier for the mitigation side of climate change. If a company gets a letter from the national government saying you have to reduce by 8% by this and that year, it's very easy. You can simply make your calculation and see what is my cost of investment for different technologies. For adaptation, it's a bit more difficult. We have policy on adaptation in Europe, but of course it's not legally binding. This is the difference from the mitigation. But still, climate change or climate services have to tackle both sides. Otherwise, it's not interesting for the companies that we try to reach out. Having said the policy commitment, I go back to what Jos Delbeke said this morning. We have the policy commitment, and I was struggling a bit with what he said. He said, please produce more data. I tell you, don't produce more data, produce more services. But it has shown that there's different perspectives of how we are seen with climate science, with the implementation. Shouldn't it be a benchmark for us if Jostel Baker comes back and says, research and innovation has supported climate services that is delivering not only the climate data that he was referring to, but also assessing and delivering or has a social or demographic or socio-economic impact. I think this is where we have to go with this roadmap, to go away from the data perspective of some stakeholders to saying we have a positive impact with climate services. So this is what I took from the first session this morning. And of course, I briefly summarize now what the provider said. Of course, providers will make their products better. That's what we heard 1 year ago. This is what everybody is working on. So we shouldn't focus the conclusions on this one. Maybe one point, Daniela mentioned the different challenges. I don't repeat them now. I think they are very valid. Some of them are in the roadmap. Everybody will work to overcome these challenges. Some are EU challenges or on European level. Some are national challenges. The roadmap cannot cover all of these challenges that are maybe of national nature. But combining this, what Philippe said, we need to be aware of what everybody is doing. We heard in the final panel about what the European Commission and the different initiatives of the EU are doing. All of these players are mentioned in the roadmap, and in the last 2 minutes, I will now maybe take the next steps, because we don't stop here. We have seen the players that are mentioned in the roadmap by the experts. I see an immediate action required, which goes into the direction of policy commitment. We will need a climate services website under the EC services as an entry point. Because if you Google EU Climate Services Research Innovation Roadmap now of the expert group, you won't find it. So we will offer an entry point. We will not subsidize what all the other actors are doing, the Climate Kick, the JPI Climate, the national governments, but we can link up with them and show how we structure these efforts. And so this is what we maybe should be doing. And of course, the coordination between the different actors here and the coordination between you, who are mostly the end users. So I finished my conclusions in time, which is not what you expect when you travel to Brussels. Thank you very much to the community, to the big players we heard this morning, the SMEs, to the public authority delegates we have here in the room, and to the scientists. Thank you very much for coming here and joining us in this launching event of the roadmap. Thanks again to the experts. And of course, thanks as always to our assistants who made it possible that we had this smooth event, which is closing in time. Maybe 2 more events I would like to highlight. The first one is the European Climate Change Adaptation Conference from 12th till 14th of May in Copenhagen, where we'll keep on discussing about climate services. And a second one is the International Adaptation Futures Conference 2016 in May, which the Commission will co-host with the Dutch government, and Provia, which is hosted by UNEP and WMO. Next year. Thank you, Andrea. It's next year. I'm thinking 1 year ahead. You see, we are innovative in Brussels. Have a safe trip home.